Information is free.
The law.
There is hope.
It's a revolution! Get down on your knees and show some appreciation.
If this is true, we should listen and be grateful.
Welcome to today's broadcast of A View from the Nest. I'm your eye in the sky, Alan Scott, traveling across the Cyrus Gate from high atop my perch at WNGS Studios, bringing you today's news and commentary from a conservative Christian viewpoint. You may wish to visit us on the web at www.eagleviews.org or follow us on Twitter at Eagle's Nest. Hi folks, Al Scott here, keeping a sharp eagle eye focused on current events, ever vigilant and standing ready to fight for faith, family, and freedom. A true moderate who believes that moderation is the key to freedom. No golden microphone here, just the values of the golden rule. And this is the way I see it.
Happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary. Pour a cheerful toast and fill it, happy anniversary. But be careful you don't spill it, happy anniversary. Oh, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary.
Hello folks, Al Scott here, another edition of A View from the Nest. And this week, a lot of anniversaries took place. We had an anniversary of Martin Luther King. We have the anniversary of the War on Poverty. We have the anniversary of Roe V Wade. And that's about enough to fill this week. Let's get started with Dr. Martin Luther King.
Architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. They were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day, this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last."
Historian Shelby Steele observed that although there's an awful lot of conservative sentiment in black America, at the moment, the party line is ruthlessly enforced. Indeed, some of King's chief lieutenants, like Jesse Jackson, tolerate no dissension from the liberal ranks today. They have abandoned King's dream and aligned themselves with political and social agendas, obsessed with color at the expense of character. Black conservatives of national statues such as Clarence Thomas, Ward Connerly, Michael Steele, Jesse Lee Peterson, Alan Keyes, Don Scruggins, Alvin Williams, Ken Blackwell, Thomas Sowell, Stahl Parker, and Walter Williams are routinely castigated by the black supremacists as Uncle Toms and puppets. Yet these are the men and women who really understand King's central message about character. On the other hand, somewhere Barack Hussein Obama himself, a well-schooled disciple of racial hatred, will be regurgitating teleprompted texts about King's legacy. But it's worth noting that in 1968, Martin King went to Obama's hometown of Chicago to meet with Mayor Richard Daley, one of a long line of Windy City Dons, including the current mayor, Obama's former chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel. Chicago was a hotbed of racial hatred under Daley then, and not much has changed. King observed, "This is the most tragic picture of man's inhumanity to man. I've been to Mississippi and Alabama, and I can tell you that the hatred and hostility in Chicago are really deeper than in Alabama and Mississippi." Chicago was not only a den of racial hatred, but the violent black supremacist movement was born there. "Those who are associated with black power and black supremacy are wrong," King said. Well, Chicago is a heavily held Democrat area. Is it any wonder then the party of the Ku Klux Klan, racial segregation, poll taxes, Jim Crow laws would be considered more racist than, say, Alabama or Mississippi? I'll be right back.
Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, once said, "Make the best quality of goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the highest wages possible." The reason Henry Ford paid his employees high wages is that Ford knew that it is employees who take their earnings to the stores that powers an economy. Henry Ford set out to make sure that his employees could afford to buy the cars they were building. Ford prospered by making everyone around him in the community prosperous. Right now, our economy is in a slump, and while it may look smart to let some of your employees go to save money, the truth is that every employee lost is someone's customer, possibly even your own. Henry Ford had something else to say. The highest use of capital is not to make more money, but to make money do more for the betterment of life. Smart man, Mr. Ford.
Take my hand and start a brand new day. And together as one we'll start to see some change.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people. Connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
Welcome back to View from the Nest. I'm Al Frederick, and this is an anniversary edition celebrating the several anniversaries that's taken place this week in our country. We have Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, which was in the first segment. Up next will be the anniversary of Roe V Wade, and a little later we'll be discussing the anniversary of the war on poverty, taking note of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and how effective the policy has been. A clue, heads up, not very effective. But first, this news article.
Thousands of people gathered on the National Mall today in the freezing cold with windshields below zero.
This is a smaller crowd from years past, and that's understandable, seeing that the wind chill's at, -5 degrees?
Just had to think of what layers I would wear so that I will stay warm all day.
Today's march marks the 41st anniversary of the Supreme Court's Roe v Wade decision to legalize abortion.
I just praise God every day for the people that do come out here and have stuck with it for the last 41 years, because it's got to stop.
Congressional leaders joined the rally, calling for an end to abortion.
We cannot allow the opponents of life to continually weaken the moral fabric of our country.
Speakers encouraged youth to be part of the movement and also promoted adoption.
This year's theme is adoption, a noble decision.
Saving those children who don't have families, it's just a wonderful and heartwarming thing to do.
Lynn Johnson had an abortion 37 years ago.
The healing process is very long and hard, and it affects every facet of life.
Today, she's sharing her experience as a means to inspire change.
I'm just totally encouraged by the number of young people, and we may end abortion if the young generation is behind it.
Together, the multi-generational crowd marched to the Supreme Court, then met with members of Congress in hopes their efforts will make a difference.
This week marked the 41st anniversary of the two most tragic Supreme Court decisions in American history, in my opinion, Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. Those decisions sparked a contentious debate between those who would deny legal protection for babies in the womb and those who rightly acknowledge that those babies constitute life, as understood throughout history and affirmed in our Declaration of Independence. Tragically, that right has been denied to 56 million unborn children. That's 56 million children were sacrificed on the altar of choice since 1973. That's human capital. That's our future. That's generations being slaughtered. 56 million of them. Roe v. Wade was the infamous case in which Norma McCorvey was used as a plaintiff by leftist attorneys to overturn laws restricting abortion in Texas. A decision upholding Texas law was ultimately overturned on appeal by the Supreme Court, which found a heretofore unprecedented right to privacy in the so-called Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Supremes divined from their living Constitution that this right entitled a woman to end the life of her baby before his birth. Now, the safest place for a child should be in the mother's womb. But since Roe v. Wade, this is not true. It's now better if a child gets born, they have a better chance of living than upon conception. Because if they're still in the mother's womb, they can be murdered and the mother be considered guiltless for just having a medical procedure. Simultaneous with Roe v. Wade, in Doe v. Bolton, using the plaintiff Sandra Canow, the Supremes determined that any complaint, including headaches, could be used as grounds for requesting an abortion. In other words, they turned childbirth into an illness or a disease or a sickness or a condition. And in other words, the symptoms of the condition, if a woman's getting bloated or going through the normal, what happens to a woman's body when she's ready to give birth, changes take place. I mean, cramps and bloating and headaches and backaches and all kinds of other conditions, which I wish the woman didn't have to go through that, but any discomfort or any inconvenience to the mother can be grounds for on-demand abortion because she's only having a medical procedure to correct the inconveniences or to correct this illness or to deal with this disease or pregnancy. Since the decision in those cases, both McCorvey and Cano have recanted their testimony. Norma McCorvey said plainly, "I think abortion's wrong. I think what I did with Roe v. Wade was wrong," and she has stood by those words in the years since. Sandra Canow, in her 2005 testimony before the U.S. Senate said, "Using my name and life, Doe v. Bolton, falsely created the health exception that led to abortion on demand and partial birth abortion. How I got there is still pretty much a mystery to me. I only sought legal assistance to get a divorce from my husband and to get my children from foster care. At no time did I ever have an abortion. I did not seek an abortion, nor do I believe in abortion. Yet my name and life is now forever linked with the slaughter of 40 to 50 million babies." How cunning, wicked lawyers use an uneducated, defenseless, pregnant woman to twist the American court system in such a fraudulent way. Doe has been a nightmare. My name, life, and identity have been stolen and put on this case without my knowledge and against my wishes. How dare they use my name and my life this way? One of the justices of the Supreme Court said during an oral argument in my case, "What does it matter if she is real or not?" Well, I am real, and it does matter. And so are the babies who have been ripped from their mother's wombs. It has always been evident, scientifically and morally, that life begins at conception. For the last word on the matter, we consult our Creator's guidebook, the Bible. The psalmist wrote, "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb." He then noted, "Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were written all the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." So God thinks life begins at conception, but we in our infinite wisdom seem to think otherwise. I'll be right back. Hang on to your tail feathers. There's more View from the Nest to come with your host, Al Scott.
The odds of a young girl being discovered by an industry insider while self-pumping gas? 1 in 300 million. The odds of the daughter of a clergyman from Severn, Maryland spending 11 weeks at number 1 on the U.S. singles charts? 1 in 19 million. The odds of going on to win 6 Grammy Awards? 1 in 1.4 million. The odds of this musician and performer having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 88. I'm Toni Braxton, and I encourage you to learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs. Early diagnosis can make a lifetime of difference. Autism Speaks. It's time to listen. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. The only thing I didn't learn in school today is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov. A message from the Ad Council.
This is A View from the Nest. Join the conversation on Twitter at Eagles Nest, or visit us on the web at www.eagleviews.org. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to A View from the Nest. I'm your host, Al Scott. If you care to follow us, you can surf on over to www.eagleviews.org or on Twitter at Eagles Nest. This is an anniversary edition of A View from the Nest. We're celebrating several anniversaries this week. We had Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. We had the anniversary of Roe V Wade. And finally, I want to take a look at the anniversary of the war on poverty.
President Lyndon Johnson began a $20 trillion taxpayer-funded war on poverty 50 years ago. Sadly, the percentage of people living under the poverty line in the United States has declined only 2% since 1965. And actually, under President Obama, the poor have lost ground. Officials say the president does not plan to honor the anniversary of Johnson's speech in 1964 that gave rise to Medicaid, Head Start, and a range of other federal anti-poverty programs. President Obama often rails against income inequality, but the Washington Times reports that his policies have had little impact on improving poverty in America. For example, a record 47 million Americans are on food stamps, and that's about 13 million more than before President Obama took office. The poverty rate stands at 15% and has remained at that level for 3 straight years. The first time this has happened since the mid-1960s.
Studies show that from the end of World War II until 1964, the poverty rate in this country was cut in half. Further, 94% of the change in the poverty rate over this period can be explained by changes in per capita income alone. Economic growth is clearly the most effective anti-poverty weapon ever devised by man, or otherwise capitalism. Economic growth would have reduced the number in poverty to a mere 1.4% of the population today, a number so low that private charity would probably have taken care of any unmet needs. But we didn't continue the trend. In 1964, under President Johnson, we launched a war on poverty. In the years that followed, the portion of Americans living in poverty barely budged. In 1965, 18% of the population lived in poverty. Today, we are at 15%, or 50 million Americans. That's after spending $15 trillion on anti-poverty programs and continuing to spend at a rate of $1 trillion a year. Now, here's something you may not know. Early on, in the first decade of our 50-year experiment with an expanded welfare state, carefully controlled experiments funded by the federal government established without question. The federal government did a study that determined without question that welfare changes behavior. It leads to the very behavioral changes that keep people in a state of poverty and dependency. Think about it. Any serious social science debate about the effects of welfare on the behavior of the recipients was resolved 4 decades ago. In other words, during the first 10 years of this 50-year experiment and its war on poverty. We now know a lot about how behavior affects poverty. In fact, if you do these 4 things, it's almost impossible to remain poor. What are the 4 things? Number 1, finish high school. No, a GED isn't the answer. Finish high school. Number 2, get a job. Number 3, get married. And number 4, don't have children until you get married. So how does welfare affect behavior? In the late 60s, the federal government sought to find that out in what Charles Murray calls the most ambitious social science experiment in history. The experiments were all conducted by social scientists who believed in the welfare state and had no doubt about its capacity to be successful. In other words, they were confident of the answers before the experiments even began. Their goal was to prove that popular wisdom was all wrong, that welfare would not cause people to reduce their work effort, to get married less often, divorce more quickly, or engage in other dysfunctional behavior. The experiments were all controlled. Randomly selected people were assigned to a control group and an experimental group. The latter received a guaranteed income, and the program even used Milton Friedman's term for it, a negative income tax. The largest, longest, and best evaluated of these experiments was SIMDIME, SIMEDIME, Seattle Income Maintenance Experiment, Denver Income Maintenance Experiment. In Seattle and Denver, and the results were not pretty. To the dismay of the researchers, they largely confirmed what conventional wisdom had thought all along. The number of hours worked dropped 9% for husbands and 20% for wives relative to the control group. For young male adults, it dropped 43% more. The length of unemployment increased, 27% among husbands and 42% for wives relative to the control group. For single female heads of household, it increased 60% more. Divorce increased 30% more among whites and 42% more among blacks. In a New Jersey experiment, the divorce rate was 84% higher among Hispanics. By the way, these results have been studied and studied over and over again, and there is a large literature on them, almost all of it written by researchers who detested the outcomes. Good summaries are provided by Charles Murray and Martin Anderson if you wish to look them up. Google it, you'll find it. Both authors, this is from Forbes article by the way, both authors point out that the results are even worse than they at first appear. For one thing, the control group had access to conventional welfare available in the 60s and 70s. So this was by no means a pure, welfare-free control group. As the enrollees were given different instructions about how long they could expect their guaranteed income to last, it turns out that the longer the guarantee, the worse the negative effects. So far as I can tell, there was no marriage penalty in these experiments, certainly nothing like we have today, and little or no penalty for earning a higher income. With the passage of time, all these incentives have been increasingly more perverse. For example, over the past 50 years, we have added one marriage penalty after another to welfare benefits. There is a very strong marriage penalty in Obamacare, for example, and even Paul Krugman concedes that the marginal tax rate faced by low-income families is in excess of 80% today. It actually goes above 100% in many cases. And Obamacare will make the penalty for working and earning even higher. So here's the important public policy question. If it's well established that self-sufficiency is closely related to working and being married, why are we fighting poverty by doing things that social scientists have known for decades lead to less work and fewer marriages? And here's a public discourse question. Why are New York Times columnists Paul Krugman and Nicholas Kristof declaring the war on poverty a success when it's so obviously a failure? Both columnists claim that if we count goods in kind, food stamps, housing, Medicaid, etc., the actual poverty rate would be lower by 1/3. Of course, if we give people enough stuff and count as income, we could declare victory and claim that there is no more poverty. Dylan Matthews makes much the same point that Krugman and Kristof make after citing a Columbia University study on the different ways of measuring poverty. He zeroes in on the key point: how much difference does government make? And says this: The most notable trend here is that the gap between before government and after government poverty just keeps growing. In fact, without government programs, poverty would have actually increased over the period in question. Government action is literally the only reason we have less poverty in 2012 than we did in 1967. Reviewing some of the early literature, I find it very difficult to determine what Lyndon Johnson would have called success in the war of poverty. But there is no doubt in my mind what the average citizen thinks success is. The goal is to have people earning enough and saving enough to support themselves above a poverty level income without any help from government. So by that measure, there has been no progress at all, despite spending $1 trillion a year on the effort. You see, it's long been proven that if you give people something for nothing, they'll tend to take that something and do nothing. However, if you put a condition on receiving that something, in other words, you work for a paycheck, people will actually go to work to get paid. So why should anybody who's receiving $9,000 or sometimes up to $30,000 worth of goods and services from the government be incentivized to go to work? They don't need to. They're getting more by staying home, walking to the mailbox and getting a check, or it's direct deposit. They don't have to walk to the mailbox, than the guy or gal that actually gets up every morning and works 8, 10, 12 hours a day to support themselves. So you see, it's long been established that welfare programs don't work, and yet here we are, 50 years down the line on this war on poverty, spending trillions of dollars. In fact, the number, I think, is almost $20 trillion in today's dollars. And if we look at the federal deficit at $21 trillion, subtract out the $20 trillion we just gave away, we'd almost balance the budget. Wouldn't that be interesting? But the know-it-alls in Washington, see, it's not really, their goal is not to ease poverty. Their goal is to make as many people dependent upon government as possible, therefore keeping themselves in positions of power where they can dole out these crumbs from the king's table to the beggars, if you will, to the subjects, to keep them dependent and keep them voting for them and keeping them in power. Eventually, it's all going to come crashing down because you run out of other people's money and there's no more crumbs to give from the king's table. The king will still have his feast, but the rest of us will be stuck with absolutely nothing. This war on poverty has to end. They're talking about all these wars that have to come to an end, and Obama's bragging about ending the Iraqi war, the Afghani war, and well, it's now time to end this war on poverty. So after 50 years and an extensive government study found out that welfare is not the answer to elevating people out of poverty. Work is. So what we need to do, we need to get the government off the backs of businesses and the heavy taxation on business that chases them offshore where they can actually remain in business and make a profit, and encourage these businesses to establish domiciles here in the States, here in our country, and create jobs. Where there's more jobs, let's look at North Dakota, where that shale fracking is taking place. It's a boom economy, the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Because why? There are jobs, and they're good paying jobs, and people are flocking there and getting employed. So the poverty rate is very, very low. However, you go into a city where there's a large accumulation of welfare recipients, you see that the poverty rate is higher in these areas. So the answer, it's long been known, is a growing economy. But Obama and his policies has been systematically strangling the economy and shrinking it. In fact, there's almost more people out of work than there are working anymore in our society. And that's really a sad state of the commentaries. So there you have the anniversary of Martin Luther King. Nothing much has changed. Even though the country has evolved on its race relationships, still our government still continues to pound its race card and divide us amongst color every opportunity that it can get. We have the anniversary of Roe V Wade, where 56 million Americans have been slaughtered in abortion areas across this nation. And we have the anniversary of the war on poverty. All three seem to be lost because of political government policies. If the people actually I mean, we had votes. The people actually went to the ballot box to vote on abortion, and the country wants to stop killing our future generations. And there has been votes on welfare reform, and policies have been passed that have been voted out or considered unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So every steps we the people are attempting to fix these problems and address these issues. Here we go, anniversary after anniversary after anniversary, down the same path of decline and destruction. Well, there you have it, the anniversary celebrations of 3 major milestones in American history, and that's the way I see it. This has been A View from the Nest. Thank you for stopping by. If you'd like to visit us, surf on over to www.eagleviews.org or like us on Twitter @Eagle's Nest. Until next time, this is Alan Scott. Good day.
Exit stage right!
And that's all, folks.
This has been A View from the Nest. The statements, comments, or opinions expressed are solely that of the author and do not represent the views or opinions of this site or any affiliates thereof.